Imagine for a second that you're watching a really sleek, high-budget corporate thriller.
Right. You know the exact vibe right away.
You completely know the vibe. You've got the private jets, the offshore tax havens, those shadowy boardrooms where men in expensive suits just decide the fate of nations.
It feels very grounded.
Exactly. It's cold, it's calculating, and it's entirely rooted in the anxieties of our modern world. But then, and I mean without a single warning, the screen flickers.
Yeah.
The boardroom dissolves, and you are literally dropped into the middle of a blood-soaked death metal music video.
Complete with backwards Latin and secret wizard guilds.
Right. And like literal demons tearing through the walls.
It is the absolute definition of narrative whiplash. I mean, you spend the first act thinking you understand the architectural rules of the world you're looking at, and then the author just, takes those rules and shatters them over his knee.
Which is honestly the perfect way to describe the wild, surreal maze we are guiding you through today. We're diving into this deeply unconventional, genre-bending apocalyptic narrative by Topi Haltu. It's called The False Flame and the Antichrist.
And if you thought you knew what a dystopian story looked like
maybe you're picturing the bleak, gray conformity of 1984 or, I don't know, the neon-soaked streets of cyberpunk.
Yeah, you need to throw that playbook out the window right now. Because Haltu isn't interested in just painting another bleak picture of government overreach.
Our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this, because what we're exploring here is a world where the lines between modern technological anxiety, dystopian mass control, and explosive ancient spiritual warfare are, well, they're totally obliterated.
The text violently collides the mundane, bureaucratic evils of our modern world with the supernatural battles of good versus evil. And what's really compelling isn't just that he mixes these genres, but why he mixes them.
Right.
He's building a thesis that our modern tools of influence are fundamentally indistinguishable from ancient dark magic.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp how he builds that argument, we need to look at the logistics of how this world is run. And that starts at the very top of the food chain, with the ultimate antagonist of this story, a figure named Endeavor Mark.
Mark is positioned as a modern-day antichrist, but his methods are just fascinatingly bureaucratic. He is essentially the CEO of the apocalypse.
Oh, totally. We're first introduced to Mark flying high above the world in this massive jumbo jet.
A jet, the text specifically points out, was purchased through a complex network of offshore tax havens.
Yes. That detail is so specific. He's up there, untouchable, reading the Bible, but not for spiritual guidance. He's reading it to reverse engineer its prophecies.
Right. He is utilizing his immense hoarded wealth, a legion of bankers, and his own production company, which is tellingly named Picturewood, by the way.
I love that name.
It's so on the nose. He uses all this to manufacture a completely fabricated, highly orchestrated religious revival across Finland and the North.
And his technological infrastructure is just staggering. I mean, he isn't just running a clever PR campaign here. He commands a network of satellite Valkyries orbiting the Earth,
which he uses to project these massive, terrifyingly realistic holograms.
Right, and booming audio directly from the sky. It forces the entire population below to literally stop in their tracks and marvel at the spectacle. And if projecting images from space isn't enough, he utilizes a supercomputer, referred to in the text as a beast computer.
Which allows him to broadcast his own voice directly into the minds of everyday citizens.
Because they've all been implanted with microchips.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly this illustrates a very modern anxiety, right? The idea of total, unyielding, non-consensual connection. We see him looking down from his plane's observatory, watching his black helicopters lower a massive, ostentatious golden cross onto the peak of a small village called Aurvara.
He just treats the physical world like a sandbox. I love how the text drives home his absolute detachment from humanity. When he finally lands, he steps into a bulletproof limousine to meet his newly enlightened servant, Pope Hymenaeus XE1.
And while sitting in the back of this limo, he's sipping a drink called a Black Mary on ice.
Yes, and he's sadistically swiping at the touchscreens built into the car's interior. He's just flicking his fingers, treating these microchip people from diverse cultures all over the globe like literal marionettes.
It's a profoundly chilling image of elite detachment. But this is where the narrative shifts gears and abandons realism entirely.
Completely throws it out.
Because that sleek corporate limo doesn't pull up to a glass and steel skyscraper. It drives toward a sheer, rocky cliff face.
A cliff face that opens up like a giant, jagged maw, just spilling blood-red light out into the dark forest. It's the hidden entrance to the secret Wizards Guild of the Half Moon.
And the moment Mark steps inside, the corporate CEO facade completely evaporates.
He walks into a massive crypt, constructed entirely out of human bones and skulls, and he just starts dancing across a checkered floor like a madman.
Singing death metal.
Yes. My brain is still trying to process this transition. Endeavor Mark is this bizarre mashup of a Silicon Valley tech bro, a James Bond villain, and a death metal frontman.
The visual language transitions instantly from Silicon Valley cyberpunk to pure, uncut occult horror.
He's suddenly wielding a red snake staff with a black pearl on top. Skeletal creatures are draping him in a red robe covered in strange, arcane symbols.
He sits down on a blood-soaked throne made of skulls.
Locks his snake staff into place and starts chanting backwards in Latin while a room full of possessed wizards cheers him on. But like, the detail that really made me pause.
Oh, the skull.
The skull. Hanging from the ceiling above him is a massive, glowing dinosaur skull, and blood is dripping upwards from a pool on the floor. It's defying gravity, just feeding into the skull's mouth. I mean, I have to push back on the author's world building here a bit.
Why is that?
Why on earth would you mix something as mundane and administrative as buying a jet through a tax haven with extreme physics-defying supernatural imagery like blood dripping upwards into a dinosaur skull? It feels like two completely different books smashed together.
It does feel that way on the surface, definitely.
Yeah.
But if we dig into the mechanics of what Halt 2 is doing, the fusion is highly intentional.
Really?
Yeah, he is making a specific argument by blending modern technological paranoia with ancient visceral occultism. By putting offshore accounts and microchips in the same room as possessed wizards and blood magic, the text is saying there is no functional difference between the two.
Oh, wow.
They are both tools of systemic extraction. Think about the blood dripping upwards, gravity pulls down, right? Nature dictates that things fall.
Right.
By having blood defy gravity to feed a prehistoric skull, the story is showing us that extreme corporate wealth hoarding and technological surveillance are not just greedy. They are a fundamental inversion of the natural and divine order.
Okay, that reframes it completely. The supernatural elements are just making the invisible violence of the corporate elements visible.
Exactly.
And we see how this global macro-level infrastructure trickles down and infects things on a highly local level, too, specifically in that village of Arvara.
Right. If Endeavor Mark represents the global architecture of this control, a character named Lars Across represents the boots on the ground. Lars runs the Temple of the Goat's Cross, and he is the corrupted local preacher executing the will of these dark wizards.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because his temple is just a masterpiece of grotesque sensory overload. The centerpiece isn't a traditional wooden cross. It is a massive aquarium shaped like a cross.
Filled with dyed water.
And fighting fish and literal piranhas. Lars stands at the pulpit using a rosary made of skulls to recite the Lord's Prayer backwards.
There are ceiling projectors blasting special effects and massive tanks that spray gold dust out over the congregation.
And on his pulpit, there's a book that looks exactly like a Bible, but inside it conceals a dark spell book. To me, I mean, this doesn't just read like a heavy metal aesthetic. Functionally, it operates exactly like a casino.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. How so?
Well, think about casino architecture, right? The flashing lights, the lack of clocks, the constant ambient noise, the carpets designed to keep your eyes off the floor. It's an environment engineered specifically to bypass your critical thinking and keep you compliant.
That's spot on.
Lars's church is doing the exact same thing. The gold dust, the piranhas, the projectors, it's the weaponization of spectacle. It's designed to overwhelm the congregation's senses so they don't notice the underlying spiritual rot.
I kept wondering, is the author just throwing every heavy metal album cover trope into a blender for shock value? Or is this a specific satirical warning about the hyper-commercialization of modern megachurches?
It's definitely the latter. It's the perfect vehicle for the false flame, which is the central motif of the entire book. And Lars takes this deception even further in private.
Oh yeah, the prayer chamber. Right, he goes into a prayer chamber and utilizes hallucinogenic oils. The text specifically notes these are oils used by cannibalistic tribes.
Naturally.
And they make the user see whatever is psychologically suggested to them. He pulls a bone-bound spellbook from a shelf, which triggers a hidden grandfather clock to chime, and an elevator shaped like a giant bony hand rises out of the floor to take him down to floor 666.
where he steps out into this massive underground club with a bar counter made of human skin and motorcycles constructed entirely out of bones.
It's so visceral.
And guided by a demonic voice in his own microchip, he walks up to an altar and blows into a massive bone horn that extends all the way up through the cavern wall to the surface.
And that horn releases a mind-altering fog straight out of the village sewers and onto the streets of Auravara.
The townspeople breathe in this toxic sewer fog, and they immediately begin to hallucinate. They look around and see breathtakingly beautiful fairies and angels flying through the air, surrounding them with warmth and light.
But the narrator pulls back the curtain for the reader, revealing that these are actually hideous, ugly spirits of the dead, whispering comforting lies into their ears.
It's a terrifying concept.
Yeah.
The villagers are completely hypnotized. They follow these hallucinations right into the back of black military trucks driven by microchipped soldiers. They're marching into their own doom with absolute smiles on their faces.
It's chilling.
If you're listening to this on your commute, thinking about your own smartphone, the algorithmic feeds that show you exactly what you want to see, suddenly Haltu's sewer fog doesn't sound so fantastical. It's a direct metaphor for how populations are led astray, not through violent oppression, but through curated comfort and chemical compliance.
The false flame is the illusion that your own destruction is actually something beautiful and desirable. But this raises a crucial narrative question.
What's that?
If the entire world is being hypnotized by this massive billion-dollar spectacle of holograms and hallucinogens, what does counterpower even look like?
Right. Because the narrative suddenly rips us away from this massive scale of deception and zooms in on a highly localized pocket of resistance. We meet Toivo and Hannah, who is also called Alyssa.
Their introduction is arguably the most important structural contrast in the entire book.
Because they aren't in a golden temple. They aren't in a high-tech subterranean bunker. They live in a poor, rundown house on the rocky, desolate outskirts of the village.
And they aren't trying to hack the beast computer or use satellite Valkyries to fight back.
No, they are sitting in their living room, holding hands, praying, and reading aloud from the Gospel of John and the Book of Revelation. They are actively declaring that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years.
And the text says Christ speaks directly to their hearts, commanding them to declare his revival and rescue the blind sheep. They ground themselves in ancient text and direct spiritual communion.
Which, in a world ruled by technological surveillance, immediately flags them as a threat. Without warning, a swarm of screaming black angels begins violently breaking down their front door. It is a terrifying supernatural home invasion.
But they don't run.
No. Toivo and Elisa don't run out the back. Instead, this incredible, massive pulse of divine light bursts directly out of their bodies. The concussive force of this internal light is so violently strong that it blows the dark angels apart into sparks.
Incredible.
And the blast wave just keeps going. It extends outside the house and slams into one of those black transport trucks, exploding it into a massive fireball.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text notes that the Savior's voice tells them this is the literal power he has clothed them in. Think about the architectural and logistical contrast here.
How do you mean?
Well, to exert power, Endeavor, Mark, and Larza Cross require massive, highly complex external infrastructure. They need jumbo jets, offshore accounts, supercomputers, subterranean clubs, chemical sewer fog. Their power is entirely dependent on machinery and mediation.
For the heroes.
They require nothing but a rundown house and their faith to generate literal, explosive, truck-destroying power. The narrative argues that true divine power is internal and unmediated. It doesn't require a golden cross or a satellite.
It makes Toivo and Elisa seem completely unstoppable. It feels like we've shifted from a cyberpunk horror story directly into an action-packed superhero origin movie where prayer is quite literally weaponized into concussive blasts.
Absolutely.
They escape out the back door into a dark ravine, and their clothes are physically radiating this brilliant light, illuminating the rocky path ahead of them. Toivo looks at the mountain towering over the village and declares their mission. They're going to climb to the peak, tear down Endeavor Mark's massive golden cross, and put a humble wooden cross in its place.
It's a powerful, triumphant setup, but this is exactly where Haltu flips the script on us again. Having established Toivo and Elisa as these superpowered beings radiating weaponized divine light, they begin their ascent up the mountain, and the narrative abruptly strips away all of their invulnerability.
Yeah, the reality of the mountain just drops like an anvil. They have to scale a slippery 400-meter-high vertical cliff face. They aren't floating up on angel wings or blasting their way to the top.
They have to put on heavy camouflage climbing gear and gas masks just to survive the environment.
They manage to climb about 100 meters up and take shelter in a stalactite cave. Realizing they are finally above the toxic fog, they take off their gas masks and toss them down into the mist. But then, tragedy strikes with shocking, unceremonious speed.
It's so fast.
A black vulture suddenly swoops down at the mouth of the cave and attacks Toivo. It viciously tears out his eyeballs and rips his scalp. The sheer pain and the physical impact cause Toivo to lose his balance, and he just plummets backward, falling down into the misty abyss below.
It is a devastating, visceral moment that completely resets the tone of the story.
Elisa is left utterly alone in the cave. The text describes her screaming in absolute horror, falling to her knees and weeping for hours. Eventually, she opens her hand and finds a silver pendant that holds Toivo's wedding ring and a small green cross.
And she realizes the bird didn't just kill her husband.
Right, it stole their climbing backpacks with all their supplies. And in that moment of profound, isolating grief, she resolves to finish the mission alone for Toivo's sake. Now, I really struggle with this transition.
Why is that?
I had to throw a red flag here. Wait, they just disintegrated Dark Angels and blew up a military truck with a concussive pulse of divine light. But 10 pages later, they need store-bought camo gear, and Toivo is brutally taken out by a single, mundane bird. Why does the author abruptly strip away their supernatural protection? It feels like a massive plot hole.
I see why it feels inconsistent, but it's actually a vital theological necessity for this specific type of narrative. The physical climb represents a trial of faith, and superpowers remove stakes.
Okay, I'm listening.
If they simply floated to the top of the mountain in a bubble of invulnerable light, the victory would be mechanical, not spiritual. By stripping away that protection and dropping them back into physical, fragile human bodies, Haltu is emphasizing the immense personal cost of belief.
That makes sense.
The narrative must ground this highly abstract conflict of angels and demons in visceral human suffering. It asks the reader, is your faith maintained only when you are radiating light and blowing up trucks? Or does it hold when you are freezing in a cave, weeping over the unexplainable loss of the person you love?
That makes a lot of sense. It anchors the story in a reality that you can actually relate to. Because we all know what it feels like to try and do the right thing, only to be met with inexplicable hardship and loss. It forces Elisa to rely on human agency rather than divine invulnerability.
Exactly. And that suffering fuels her as she pushes on entirely alone. She finally reaches the summit for the ultimate showdown, and this climax perfectly merges the macro and micro conflicts we've been tracking.
Just as she is pulling herself over the final edge of the cliff, a massive flock of red-eyed ravens swarms her. She's physically tearing these birds out of her hair, running on pure, unadulterated rage.
She scrambles into an ancient forest at the peak
and manages to dig up a hidden stash of supplies that Toivo had planted there previously. She uses torches and Molotov cocktails to create a blazing ring of fire around herself, which finally drives the screeching birds back. She opens a wooden chest from the stash and arms herself with dynamite and an actual sniper rifle. She is fully locked and loaded.
She has transitioned from a glowing spiritual entity to a highly tactical, desperate survivor.
But before she can even pull the trigger, the heavens decide to intervene. Beautiful worship music suddenly echoes down from the sky. The dark clouds physically tear open, and millions of figures dressed in white appear singing Hosanna.
And then a massive white eagle descends from the radiant sky.
It dies down, grabs Endeavormark's massive golden cross in its talons, carries it over Lars's goat's temple in the village below, and just drops it like a bomb.
The impact crushes the temple into absolute ruins, setting off a massive mushroom cloud explosion. The destruction of the false infrastructure is instantaneous.
And the effect is immediate. The light of God spreads through the village, and the thousands of people who are hallucinating in the fog are instantly freed from the demons that possess them.
But Elisa's fight isn't over.
No. Suddenly a horrifying shout echoes from deep inside the mountain itself, demanding that she be offered as a sacrifice. Black chains burst out of the solid rock, wrap around her, and drag her violently down into a dark subterranean crypt, pinning her to a stone sacrificial altar.
And standing over her is Endeavormark, the Antichrist himself.
His eyes have turned entirely pitch black, and he raises a wicked bone sword to strike her down. In that split second, Elisa remembers she has one last weapon. She reaches down to her thigh and pulls out a silver dagger engraved with angelic runes.
Screaming Toivo's name.
She thrusts the dagger upward, plunging it directly into Mark's heart. The moment the blade connects, a fiery vortex rips open in the center of the room, instantly sucking Mark and all of his shadow wizards straight down into hell.
Which sets up the ultimate philosophical question of the book's climax.
So what does this all mean? Because, I mean, it plays out exactly like a final boss fight in a video game. You have the massive environmental stage hazard, the eagle dropping the cross, and then the protagonist pinned down, pulling out the hidden legendary weapon at the last possible second. But why pair these two very distinct types of victory together?
This raises an important question about the limits and necessities of human agency against cosmic evil. You have the massive unearthly divine intervention, the eagle and the mushroom cloud, paired directly with intense, gritty, close-quarters combat.
Right.
The text suggests that cosmic intervention is necessary to clear out systemic infrastructural rot, like the massive goat's temple. But the final fatal blow against the literal heart of evil requires human participation. Justice, in this narrative, is a collaboration between divine will and human action.
The moment that human blow is struck, the transition is just staggering. The fiery vortex to hell snaps shut. The dark, bloody vision of the crypt completely vanishes. Elisa suddenly finds herself standing at the sunlit mouth of a cave, looking out over the mountain.
And the world hasn't just survived. It has been instantly, jarringly reset to a state of absolute purity.
The aftermath is immediate and total. We look up at the sky, and there is a white, swan-shaped airplane flying overhead, using golden letters to skywrite Agape Village among the clouds.
Down below, the village that was just covered in sewer fog and demonic hallucinations is perfectly restored.
It is surrounded by lush green trees, birds are singing, and colorful butterflies are dancing in the air. One butterfly even flutters down and lands perfectly on Elisa's hand. I have to be honest, I really struggle with the tonal whiplash of this ending.
How come?
Well, we go from eye-gouging vultures, a mushroom cloud, and a fiery vortex of hell to a swan plane and Disney-esque butterflies in a matter of seconds. Doesn't a utopian, aggressively peaceful ending like that feel unearned after so much gore? Or is it meant to feel jarring? Traumas leave scars, you know? This feels like a cheap reset button.
It definitely feels jarring to a modern reader who expects nuance and lingering trauma. And many critics would likely agree with you that it feels unearned. But to understand it, we have to view it through the lens of apocalyptic storytelling traditions.
Okay.
These narratives do not deal in shades of gray or psychological realism at the end. They rely on absolute binaries. Total darkness versus blinding light. When you have a conflict defined by profound apocalyptic evil, the kind of evil that drips blood upward into a dinosaur skull, the eradication of that evil cannot leave scars on the earth.
Wow. Yeah.
The genre demands that the complete destruction of the Antichrist necessitates an immediate magical return to an Eden-like state of total innocence. The suddenness of the butterflies and the swan plane is exactly the point. It signifies that the world hasn't just healed organically over time, it has been divinely, instantly overwritten.
It is an absolutely wild journey from start to finish. We have taken you from the sleek cabins of tax haven jumbo jets, down into subterranean clubs with bone motorcycles, up a treacherous cliff face, armed with weaponized light and sniper rifles, and finally out into a sunlit valley with swan airplanes and butterflies.
A lot to take in.
Yeah. Navigating a text that violently mashes up so many extreme, contrasting elements can be incredibly dizzying. It is sensory overload by design, a labyrinth of mixed metaphors and aggressive imagery.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider as you step back into the real world. We spent this entire time unpacking how this story uses extreme, hypervisual metaphors to depict the dangers of our era, equating algorithms with sewer fog and offshore wealth with dark magic.
Right.
But what does our human fascination with these intense apocalyptic narratives of absolute good versus absolute evil say about us as readers? How does leaning into these massive, explosive binaries help us process the very real, often invisible, and highly nuanced complexities of modern technology, corporate power, and morality that we have to navigate in our everyday lives?
Because maybe, just maybe, when the complexities of the modern world feel too murky, too algorithmic, and too exhausting to untangle, it's deeply comforting to imagine a world where the lines are drawn in glowing light, where evil can simply be stabbed in the heart, even if it means dodging a few demons along the way.